Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the meeting of the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Committee, 8th of June 2022. I have apologies from absence from Councillor Van Dyke and Councillor Adeoye substituting, and from Councillor Opara, and we have Councillor Ahmed substituting for her. Are there any others? That's good. And can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 3rd of March 2022 and the record of the joint meeting of committees held on the 18th of May 2022, accepting that Maria Beanie should be added to the list of attendees at the last meeting? Is that agreed? Thank you. I've got no urgent matters, and can I also suggest that reordering the agenda slightly? If members are agreeable, I propose to swap items 7 and 8. Is that agreed? Okay. Okay, item 4. Are there any disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests or any declarations of whipping? Nope. Excellent. Okay. Here we go then. Item 5. Sorry.
Sorry, Chairman. Can I just... Sorry. I'll shout. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then a report on the school performance for academic year 2020 to 2021. You'll find on pages 25 through 68 of your papers. Despite us deferring threats from the previous meeting, disappointingly, the Regional Schools Commissioner's officer has been unable to send anyone to the meeting. So Teri will collate any questions we wish to put to the RSC as a starting point, and we will then either get a response in writing or invite them to a future meeting of the committee. And I'll put on record my intense annoyance that this should happen, and a letter has gone off. So anyway, Celia will be introducing this report, and officers, if you've got anything you wish to add to the report before I open up for debate. Celia, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so this is the annual performance scorecard. As you know, we missed quite a lot of the academic data because of the pandemic, so that isn't reported. And the measures that are in there, some of them are quite historic, but it is indicated in the report where those measures come from. Other than that, I think we'll just open for questions.
Members, Clive.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the officers for the report. Details as always. It is disappointing the RSC aren't with us. I mean, to be fair to them, they've been pretty good coming in previous years. But it is disappointing not to be able to talk to them. There's a range of issues that I'd like to raise. I'll limit myself to start off with to, first of all, the government's white paper and the potential future impact of the white paper provisions. So the white paper is the stage, I think, before legislation, so we're not being asked to consult on it, but it does have a number of implications for us, particularly the proposal for forced academisation by 2030. The NEU's done quite a lot of work on, National Education Union's done quite a lot of work on academisation as opposed to LEA schools, and data from them supported by the ONS, I understand, shows that academies don't necessarily perform better than local authority schools. So I'd be interested to know what officers' view on that is. The white paper generally, but particularly the forced academisation. There's a few years to go before that faces us, but needs to be a strategy now. And also the Green Paper, so we are being asked to consult on the Green Paper. There's a number of provisions in that which, to my mind, look quite positive. I'd agree with the diagnosis in the Green Paper about the state of the SEND system at the moment, nationally, but also locally. And the proposals would seem to indicate improvement, but I'm wondering what the view of officers might be in terms of school performance locally. Thank you.
Thank you. So, in response to your question about the white paper, we've had a number of conversations with the Regional Schools Commissioner, particularly around the academisation agenda. And actually, that's probably a question that does need to go to the RSC in respect of that. Their feedback to us has been it's not forced, and it will be where schools are underperforming or have a consistent, so 2 or more RI judgments, that they would move to do that. The other thing that is discussed in that white paper is about local authority trusts and local authority established MATs, and more detail about that was published a couple of weeks ago. In reality, the detail is that they will run as MATs under the same regulations. Local authorities now can have a 19.9% share of a MAT board, and that won't change. That is the maximum limit that is going to be on any local authority established MATs. So arguably they're the same as multi-academy trusts as they are now. They have the same responsibilities to the Regional Schools Commissioner, and local authorities can opt to establish those with their schools. They are going to pilot that in a few areas before they move to it being more fully established. The other agendas in that white paper around high quality teaching and every child having access to excellent teaching, the raising of attainment and achievement, so some very high aspirational attainment targets set for 2030 around Key Stage 2 and particularly Key Stage 4 achievement. We are still in the discussions. The Regional Schools Commissioner is having discussions. It met with the primary heads this morning to talk about that. And again, I think in terms of the journey from A to B, that's a question that we do need to put back to the Regional Schools Commissioner and get them in with us. In terms of the Green Paper, we are conducting meetings with our schools at the moment to understand their view on that. I agree with you, Councillor Johnson, that there's some really positive noises in that paper, but again, the devil will be in the detail. As you know, we are part of the Safety Valve Intervention Programme and we are reviewing our SEND strategy, and that is going to come back to this meeting at a later date with a lot of the detail. But part of what we are considering is the impact of the Green Paper and the role of schools and alternative provision in our special schools within how we address those SEND problems.
Pat.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the Green Paper is very pertinent for our trust and our school, because we are going to have a big discussion about this, I believe, at the next LAB, because I've brought it to the notice of the school, but they're already doing things. So, yes, we're very much involved with that. Actually, on the papers here tonight, on page 28, there are 2 paragraphs that I would like some explanation of what is written here. The first one is the 4.2, the second bullet point, reference national and significantly higher proportion reported with damage, in inverted commas, as the reason. What does that actually mean? 4.3, the second bullet point, reference no pupils with EHC plans should be catered for in a PRU. Currently, 4.9% of our pupils in PRUs have EHC plans. So that's something I think I'd like an explanation for as well. Page 45, I was just interested to see that in the pupil referral units, the mixed race young people seem to be more prevalent in that particular type of provision. And could you explain, please, what the actual wording means on page 53, reference the paragraph to the right? I must say I had great difficulty in reading this paper. The writing was so tiny. Although Medway's overall absence compares favourably to the national profile, there is a difference in performance between primary and secondary that is masked. What does that actual wording mean, masked? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just note the page number of the last comment that you made? Sorry.
Yes, it's on page 53, and it's the paragraph to the right. The very top sentence is talking about the difference between primary and secondary that is masked. I'm just wondering what does that actually mean?
Okay, that's fine. Okay, I'll come on to that one. So on those points, the first one around the permanent exclusion and suspension rates and the reason given. So damage is usually referred to physical damage to property and buildings, etc. So when a school registers a suspension or an exclusion, they record a list of reasons that are given, that are set reasons. They don't make them up, so they're collated centrally. And so Medway have a higher proportion of drug and alcohol related and damage related. It's usually damage to property, etc. But we have a relatively low rate of permanent exclusions and suspensions compared to nationally. So the reason behind those might well be skewed because of that. You talked about the EHCP plans in a PRU. So we do have children with EHCPs in a PRU. We are looking into that in more detail. Quite often that is because they went to the PRU and then the PRU secured them an EHC plan. So we don't place children in the PRUs with the EHCPs, but sometimes they end up in there and then this PRU goes and secures those children an EHCP. The comment on the attendance, I'm just trying to see it on my screen. I can't move it over, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all right, I've got it in front of me. So the overall figures, so what it's talking about is actually when you break it down, our attendance figures are quite significantly different between our primary and our secondary. Our primary attendance figures are better. So an overall percentage masks the fact that we have a bigger problem in the secondary sector. And there was one other point, wasn't there? What was that about the...
Yes, in the PRUs, the mixed race seems to be quite high, according to this chart.
Yeah, and that is the case. We do have, and that's a national picture as well, but in Medway there is a high proportion of mixed race young people in our alternative provisions at the moment.
Is there any particular reason why that is? Is it just that the population is higher, or is there just something extra that's happening?
I don't know the answer to that. I can take it away and have a look at it, but I haven't looked at that. Nationally, it is a bigger picture, but I wouldn't like to make a guess at the answer to that. I'll take it away and come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Wendy.
Actually, Councillor Cooper's raised thing. I was wanting some more information about improving the pupils with SEND, and I think that we really do need a little bit more information, because we are getting some children who are actually waiting for EHC plans, and I would... Can you hear me? Good. Yeah, I would like more information with Pat, so perhaps we can have that come along. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is attendance is declining and persistent absence is increasing. And I know it says it's a national average, and that's fine, but I'm actually worried about Medway. And so I do think that I would like some more information on that, if you cannot supply it this evening, because I think that that's something very important that we should be looking at. The main thing is getting our children into school, isn't it?
Thank you. Yes, so on both of those things, we have the new SEND strategy and the plan coming to a future meeting, and we'll give you a lot more detail around that. There was supposed to be an agenda item this evening on persistent absence, that report, but because we didn't have the latest release data in time, we've moved that to next month's report. However, our persistent absence, because we've got the figures now, they just weren't in time for the delivery of the report. So our persistent absence return for the whole of last year, the 2020 to 2021, is 13.4%. Nationally, it's 12.8%. So that's our rate of persistent absence. So it is much improved to the terms 1 to 4 data, but actually it's still not in line with national. So we're 1 percentage point in line with national. If you remember at the last quarterly monitoring, we were around 20%. And that is in the performance report that's later on.
I understand it's gone down, but it's still, in my opinion, a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Stuart?
Thank you very much. That's a bit loud. Thanks for the report, actually, which I find is likely to be a very useful reference document as well. You know, it's not just using it today. I'm sort of relatively new coming back to this committee, so forgive me for asking a question that others here might know the answer to quite well. And I'd like to understand, and I'm very disappointed, I wouldn't be as nice as Councillor Johnson, who seemed very understanding that the Commissioner is not here. I'd put it a bit stronger than that. I'm incredibly disappointed because it's so important. But I realise that's beyond anyone's control here, and I hope that we do have the Commissioner at some future stage. But I suppose my question is about the interventions that can be made when there are problems. It's sometimes difficult. We can ask questions on the outside looking at data and performance of schools. And I've read with some care the services provided by the Education Division, which is handy. But it seems to me that all that one can do is offer advice. And I suppose at the top of page 41 or second paragraph, it says this is about enabling parents to make informed choices. Well, that's also very good. But can someone explain to me when a school is not performing, what sort of measures and by whom and in what way can be put in place to take action to correct what is clearly or possibly going wrong, other than just gnashing one's teeth and offering advice?
Thank you. So it's quite a complex answer to that question because it depends on who the school is accountable to. So as a local authority, we have powers to perform schools causing concern and challenge where they are local authority maintained schools. But the majority of the schools in Medway are not. They are academy trusts, so they are responsible to the Regional Schools Commissioner. So we still do monitor and keep our eye on the performance of those schools, but when we have a concern, we can't send them warning notices, we can't force intervention on them, we can only offer support. That the role of the quality and improvement of those schools is down to the Regional Schools Commissioner. So is perhaps another question to add to Claire's notes. On our schools, we obviously go in and provide support. We have regular school improvement teams that go in and do that work, and when necessary we can take formal action to do anything right up to removing the governing body if we need to.
Yeah, thank you for that. You answered as I expected. In fact, that's the same answer when I asked a similar question in 2015, so nothing has changed much, it seems. In which case, I'd be interested to know in recent times when and how the Commissioner has intervened with schools within Medway. You probably don't know the answer to that, but if we could ask the Commissioner that question, that would be very good to know what action, by way of example, has been given in the past 1 or 2 years, say. Thank you.
You got that, Teri? Yeah. That question's been noted. Mr. Williams?
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Just referring to the persistent absence that was mentioned earlier, is I know this is pre-pandemic data, isn't it? So is the measure the same with the fact that if children have COVID twice in a year, there's 20 days and then considered persistent absence? In terms of the measure for the next year, are you looking at different percentages, or are you still looking at the 90% or below 90% measure? And also got Or do you want to come back on that one first before I ask my next one, or do you want me to ask them all together?
I'm happy to respond to that one. So we have got that detailed persistent absence report coming to the next meeting. In essence, persistent absence is just taken from the overall data. So the target that's in our monitoring report that's included this evening is the pre-pandemic target of 11%. And what we're reporting now is, so the most recent data that I've just said there, around the 13.4%, is the 2020 to 2021 academic year that we're at 13. Now, interestingly, the DFE is now publishing absence data, so proportional absence, which is looking quite high in terms of the autumn term at 6.8%, but then they are cleaning that data to remove COVID absences from it, which brings it down. So when we look at our comparative data, we also will need to do that cleaning process so that we're comparing apples with apples, as it were.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. Thank you, Celia. Just a question regarding the targets that are mentioned on page 29 about improving in all subject areas at Key Stage 2. But one of the strengths on page 28 is that in Medway schools are above national in Key Stage 1. So the question there is about the progress across Key Stage 2. And what do you feel are the causes for that? Is it the fact that Key Stage 1 is teacher assessment, Key Stage 2 is externally assessed? Is it a curriculum at Key Stage 2 level? Is it a quality of teaching issue, or a combination?
So I think it would be fair to say that I don't know the answer to that at the moment, and actually that was part of the conversation that we were having at the primary heads meeting this morning. So historically there has been a deficit in terms of the Key Stage 2 outcomes compared to really good Key Stage 1 outcomes and progress within secondary schools. But in terms of really understanding why that is, I don't know the answer. And actually, until we get the Key Stage 2 results that have just been done for our young people, which have been done exactly the same as they were pre-pandemic, because the DFE is looking at that to benchmark to really get a good sense of lost learning, we won't know how disparate that data is. So at the moment, the data you've got is 2019, isn't it, in your pack?
Great, thanks, Celia.
Thank you, Lily. Tristan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. First of all, with the Regional School Standards Commissioner, do we have a reason why he didn't attend? For instance, is there anything outstanding at the moment with him that he might have with this council that is the reason why he isn't sat here this evening? Does anyone know of any complaints that have been made to him, or is there any references he has been sent that might mean that he isn't here because he's embarrassed by that? I don't know. So if anyone does have anything outstanding with him in the local authority, perhaps they can mention that. The second question I have is just looking at other school performance reports at other similar local authorities. They have a lot more data on Key Stage 4, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 2 performance. In fact, they break it down by years. When I look through this, I'm getting no data or very little data on actual performance of from metrics. So I'm getting paragraphs from Key Stage 2. I look at Brighton's similar report, and I'm getting year-by-year breakdown, school-by-school breakdown, just a lot more granular detail on actual teaching and learning outcomes. This is mostly a couple of, I mean, it's very well presented, to be fair, but it's from a professional perspective, I would like to have seen, if parents look at this, why is there not more data in here around Key Stage 2 outcomes? Why is the absence level not broken down by year group like Brighton and Hove is? Can we look to other authorities and take their best practice and present actual outcomes? Because that's what I want to know as a parent. I want to know what schools, what's the absence levels, what year groups are not attending. There's a lot of averages in here, and it's just, yeah, I don't know if that could be done. And my third question, if I may, is just around the attendance. Well, I've got another one, but yeah, the question is just around attendance. At the moment, it says that we have an advisory service, that we have a sort of, I don't know if that's a third party or not. How many, at the moment, looking at our current numbers post-COVID, which is more significant, I think, given some of the press reports, What currently is the casework for the attendance and advisory service? How many cases are we getting sent to us from some local schools, and how many are actually getting to prosecution? Because, you know, just as an aside, post-COVID, there's definitely a landscape where attendance is a problem, and I suspect that is going to be manifest in the numbers. So we will know that by now, surely from our advisors internally, that they have got increasing workload or benchmarks. So I just wanted to know what the feedback was on the level of referrals we're getting in from schools, and also what's the prosecution levels like? Are we sending them to court, or are the courts not prosecuting them because of COVID? I'm just interested to know some stats on that. And just lastly, I just wanted to have an update, please. I know I've talked about 6.4 a lot, and this is the updated high needs budget. Obviously, I questioned the officer last year who guaranteed the figures were accurate, and then 6 months later it turned out the figures were not quite as I thought they were. Do we have an update in terms of have government been engaged on the high needs budget? Is there any scope for any support from government, given the question marks at the moment with budgets nationally? And I just wanted to know if we're still on course to have a report by September, because I know that has been delayed once before. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So in response to the Regional Schools Commissioner, the Regional Schools Commissioner is Claire Burton. She was engaged with us this morning. She was at the primary heads meeting this morning. I don't know why she can't attend tonight, but it's not to do with the relationship. I know that the Regional Schools Commissioner's office is having a number of changes, and Claire will be moving over to focus on London, so maybe that has something to do with it. But it's certainly nothing that we would need to worry about. Your point about the performance report and the breakdown and usable data is a really good one, and we will take that away and absolutely have a look at that for you and come back with some other suggestions. In terms of the prosecutions, I don't have that data in front of me, but I will make sure it is included in the July report around attendance. We can include that prosecution data in there for you. And the other one around the high needs budget. So those figures are right. We have Mariah here. We are engaged in the safety valve programme, so we are at the moment engaged in conversations with the DFE around how we will work together to resolve that deficit over a period of 4 to 5 years. What we need to do as an authority is to make sure we get to operating within a positive in-year balance, and then they will be putting support in. At the moment, the signs are that we will be getting that support. We need to get that plan agreed, but that will be coming to you in the September meeting. It's been delayed because of the safety valve, and we need to align our SEND strategy and our safety valve plan, so that and that's our timeline, the DFE's timeline for getting that agreed, and then that will come to you.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 or 3 questions, if I may. I just wanted to go back to the PRU, similar sort of question to what Councillor Cooper asked before. I'm not quite sure it was, what I wanted to ask wasn't quite answered, in as much as I don't understand why we wouldn't place a child with a EHCP at one of these provisions. I didn't understand that. I'm not sure if that's a very stupid question that I should know the answer to, but if you could explain that. And the PRUs, is that what we previously called an alternative provision, and we're now calling PRUs? And I didn't know when that change came in, and I don't know whether it's okay to call it either. Just on the Appendix B, I noticed that there's sort of 4 secondary schools that are considerably higher number of days for exclusion. And I just wondered if there's any sort of joint working between these schools, the secondary schools, to sort of, support that can be given to these schools. I mean, some of them are sort of it's twice as many of days that they are excluding pupils for, and I'm sure they've got their reasons and what have you, but if there's any sort of joint working that could help them. And just finally, because it is on our agenda later on about Gillingham Football Club's school, I noticed there's no mention of them in the appendix, and I just wondered why that was as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So, the reason why we don't put children with the HCPs in schools is because an education, health and care plan is for young people who have long-term needs that need support in terms of access to learning. And our pupil referral units or alternative provision, the name can be used interchangeably, are there to support either those that have fallen out through exclusion or support reintegration and back into school. So where a young person needs longer term support and a robust plan that's an education, health and care plan, we wouldn't normally expect to see them in a PRU or an alternative provision situation like that. We'd expect to see them in a special school, even where that need is SEMH, because we would expect it to be an SEMH special school. In terms of the exclusion, so we have an exclusion team. Our exclusion team work closely with schools when they are thinking about excluding, and they discuss that with our exclusion team. Again, it goes back to the answer that I gave earlier, which is where they're a local authority school, we have more ability to influence their decisions around that and to provide appropriate challenge. And where they're an academy, that data is monitored by the Regional Schools Commissioner. So it's about our relationship with them, but we do have relationships with them. We do have one or two secondaries, as you've noted, that are higher excluders, and we do have those conversations with them. And your third point was about Gillingham Football Club. Gillingham Football Club is an independent school, and so in terms of the data and the record of data that we get, we don't publish it in this school's performance report.
Okay, thank you. Can I just come back on 2 points? So on the last one, if we are placing children there, should we not be taking data on that then? That's my one question. And just regarding going back to the PRUs again with regards to the EHCP, I accept your point there about that being a sort of a short-term placement and about the EHCP, but I think I'd be concerned about having a target of 0 for children being placed there, because it might be, okay, an EHCP is long-term, but it might be that the child still needs some sort of short-term placement and could go back into a mainstream school with an EHCP. So I'm just a bit concerned that that would be sort of our target, to have 0 children in those settings with EHCPs.
Thank you. So in terms of the data around independent schools, that is collected and recorded and monitored. The children that are in independent schools have EHCPs largely, and so our quality assurance team pick that up. It's not included in national data sets in the same way, because these data sets come from the DFE and central databases, but we do include that data internally. I accept your point around the PRU and that there's always movement. Actually, our target is to have no children in an alternative provision or a PRU, because that is almost where they fall out to and we have to put them back in, and actually our intervention needs to be early enough that children aren't excluded from school. So, but I take your point that actually for some children with EHCP it might be necessary. My challenge to schools, though, would be if the child needs an EHCP in the school and the PRU is able to get it, why hadn't the school asked for it and put it in place before they ended up there?
Thank you. Joanne.
Yes, thank you. Some of my questions have already been touched. I want to thank Celia and your team, Rebecca Smith, because I felt it was really easy and comprehensive. I just think that I wish academies were performing as well as your team are doing with our schools. I mean, I do think academies are mired by less accountability to the community, parents, and cronyism. But what I'm troubled and concerned about really is the Gillingham school, FEC, GFC. If we are off-rolling children and sending them there, why is there no accountability for that? Because if they're a PRU, there's got to be some accountability somewhere. And who tendered that? Because there's lots of substantial figures for that, if it's not anywhere. And then my final thing is I'm worried about Crook and Wood. You know, as an independent custody visitor, I check that people who have been arrested are having everything looked after. Are we checking that those pupils, those children who have had a second failing from Ofsted are having a Medway education, because somebody needs to be accountable, because obviously the prison service are not being that accountable?
Thank you. So I'll revert you back for GFC. GFC is an independent provider. So our quality assurance team, our commissioners, do monitor the outcomes of independent providers, and we are tracking that. They're not recorded centrally like our PRUs or our maintained schools or our special schools, because that's recorded centrally, that's pulled together centrally by the DfE and informs national statistics as well as our statistics. Where we commission independently, they are very much one-to-one bespoke packages that we monitor individually. So the outcomes might not even align with some of them. I accept actually that, you know, things like attendance and things will, but at the moment it's not included in that data. Any other discussion about GFC needs to be left till the end of the meeting, because it's a confidential item in terms of that. Do you want to answer Cook and Wood?
Cook and Wood has an independent scrutineer, as most of you know. I think that the question you've raised is a valid one. We do have Oasis Secure School coming into Medway. I'm going to suggest, Councillor, if it's all right with you, Chair, that we have something specific on that, because I think it's more complicated than we've got time for this evening, other than to assure you that we do have an independent scrutineer whose part of his responsibility is to keep that oversight. But good question. I think it needs more time.
Okay. Thank you. Roger.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I just want to know, regards absence, how many days is it before something becomes persistent, and the levels of intervention before a fine may be imposed to the parent, and the support that may be given to the child and the parent during this period of time? Thank you.
Thank you. So persistent absence is an attendance of less than 90% over a persistent period. So it's initially measured terms 1 to 4 of a school year. So any child with an average attendance of less than 90% is considered persistently absent. In terms of a process, a legal process and fining and court action, that is triggered by the school, and it can be triggered at any stage actually, but will be in with discussion with our attendance team. Our attendance team would then advise the school on activity that they could engage in and strategies they could engage in to support the parent and support the attendance. Actually, prosecution, fining is our last resort and is never really helpful in resolving the issue. What you'll also find is that actually court cases are not successful if it is deemed to be detrimental to the family. So any family with additional needs, additional support coming in, the judge will deem that that's not beneficial. So we put an awful lot of earlier intervention in with the schools that engage with us through our attendance team around strategies and support for families, etc.
Okay. Mr. Guerin-Hassett.
Good evening. Just a clarification for the point earlier by Lenny. In the data here for 2020-21, COVID absence didn't affect attendance because it was recorded differently. It's only in this year that it actually impacts attendance. So that second one was just to come back, Celia, a challenge to you. You said you would challenge schools about why they didn't apply for EHCPs when the child went to the PRU. It'd be good to have the information about how many of the children at the PRU were declined an EHCP, then they were permanently excluded, and then awarded the EHCP at the PRU.
Thank you. I can take that away and look at that detailed data. Ultimately, what we're aiming for is the earliest intervention, isn't it? The earliest identification of need and the earliest intervention, which doesn't require necessarily a diagnosis or any other support. And I know there are a lot of frustrations, both on school side and on the council side, in some of the operation and the process that is required around gaining an EHCP and the time frame. and actually if a school applies for an EHCP, but that's a 20-week wait, and we know we're behind on a number of those, things have escalated quite quickly. So the SEND work that we're doing and the SEND report that comes back will outline some of the strategies that we're putting in place to try and reduce that instance. But I can have a look at that data as well and include it in that report.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from that with regards to SEND, I just want you to take us through the process in diagnosing or accessing a child learning needs, who's responsible immediately, whether it's the school, what role the council play in that, and how do we benchmark against other authorities in terms of numbers or a percentage of students who have been diagnosed with dyspraxia, dyslexia, and etc. I'll tell you the reason for this. We have come across a few parents who have struggled to get children diagnosed, finding family falling through the cracks. So I just want to ascertain whether the parents are missing something or whether we are missing something as an authority or the school.
Thank you. So every parent, child and school can ask for us to consider assessing a child for an EHCP, and we have to consider it. So even an email from a parent, we then consider that. We have to consider that in terms of a statutory time frame in around 6 weeks, and after 6 weeks make the decision as to whether to assess or not. And within those 6 weeks, we look for information from any professionals that have been involved with the child and the parents, and we ask the school for information. If we choose to assess, we then have another 14 weeks to consider to gather all the evidence, look at an ed psych assessment that would give us more information about what that child needs, and in terms of our statutory guidance, have 14 weeks to either issue an EHCP or say that we're not going to issue an EHCP. And at every stage, there is an appeal process, so that can happen. Now, we are currently meeting that 20-week time frame for about 60% of our applications, which is not good enough. It is higher than national, but it's not good enough. And that is because we are swamped with applications in terms of our capacity to be able to do them. We do have a higher proportion of children in Medway with EHCPs than nationally. It has gone down slightly, but we are sitting at 3.7% of children with EHCPs, and nationally is at 3.6%. We were up at 4% previously. So we're reducing the number that we're issuing, and we're pushing more back into the schools. Now, the reality is that an EHCP isn't a golden ticket, nor is a diagnosis. Actually, when a child needs support, the support should be easily accessible. But at the moment, we have a system where the only way that support can be accessed is through going through a process for an EHCP. So we're working really hard at the moment with our schools to say, you don't need a diagnosis. If a child is presenting with certain needs, let's put the intervention in. And we have published an ordinarily available provision document, which does outline the statutory duty on schools in terms of them having to carry out their best endeavours to meet learning needs and the needs of children with SEND. And we are refocusing our system to put more support into mainstream schools, more funding and more support so that they can put that intervention in without the need for an EHCP. Does that answer your question?
Yes, just a little bit on the benchmarking side. Is there any information as to percentage of tests or assessment that's been carried out in comparison to other authorities?
So we'll make sure that's included in the SEND report that comes through. I don't have it in front of me, but yes, absolutely there is, yes.
Councillor, just on that question, I have noticed post-COVID I'm getting a lot more emails direct to me from parents asking for their child to be assessed. So I think there's also an issue there around what's happening in the community, parents probably upped anxiety, those sorts of things. So there's definitely an increase in parents asking for their children to be considered for an EHCP post-COVID, in my view.
Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a continuation actually of what Councillor T. just said. When it comes to the assessment side, does this include the preschools as well? Because I know of an incident where a family were informed that their child was going to be assessed and it was going to happen the next day. And then, when they turned up, it didn't happen. And then a few weeks later, they went to pick the child up and were told he was assessed that day. So I'm really concerned about how the process is working. And as Habib said, we could be falling down the cracks within the pavement for some parents.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't sure whether you said PRUs or preschools, but the process is the same for any age child, actually right the way up until they're 25. So I accept your comments that things aren't working possibly as well as they should be, and possibly that's around communication as well. As a moment at the council, we are running at a 50% capacity with our education psychologists, so we are struggling even to meet our statutory workload in terms of those assessments, and we are running behind on the time frame of that. But I will take your comment back, and if you want to email me separately about an individual case, please do.
Clive.
Thank you, Chair. If I can come back for a second bite at the cherry.
But only one question, not four, or even three.
Okay. Well, just a couple of things to point out. Stuart's point about my lack of characteristic ferocity, I think it's probably fair to say about the RSC, is because actually the RSC has a large number of local authorities to cover, and we have, like it or not, we've been quite lucky that they've come to us, and I think we were among the first for them to start coming. Now, you're absolutely right, they should be coming to all local authorities regularly. So absolutely agree that they should be coming. The Key Stage 2 issue's been long-standing. I remember when I was first elected, it coming to this committee, and the then Director of People, whatever the title was then, which isn't anybody that's some time ago now, identified low aspiration among school leaders for that, and we took that to task. I've been working in schools. I knew that was absolutely not the case, and it wouldn't be if it's so persistent as well. So I'm glad to see that there's a different version of that. A couple of quick, a quick issue about the holiday activities fund. So that's feeding young people during the holidays, but if they attend the activities, what if they don't attend the activities? In the past, there's been a voucher system. I just want to clarify whether that's still the case. And just a comment on the discussion about the SEND system, and I mentioned it earlier with the Green Paper, there is extraordinary levels of stress amongst parents. You don't even need to tell you that, but it does need to be said. Extraordinary levels. The reason that there's so many referrals is because parents know that their kids aren't getting what they need, and there is such a time limit. If you wait 4 years, and you might well wait 2 years for an ASD diagnosis. 4 years for a 6-year-old is a real chunk of their education. So I look forward to the SEND strategy. I know to some extent your hands are tied, but we do need to be addressing this. This is nationally and locally a real problem. So I think the only thing is about the food. Thanks.
Thank you, Clive. And Julia, could you answer that, please?
Hello, I'm Julia Thomas, Senior Public Health Manager. In reference to the HAF programme, so obviously you're aware it's a government-run initiative, and our obligation is to deliver a programme for 6 weeks, so a week at Easter, 4 weeks in the summer, and a week at Christmas. So, and those are enrichment activities, food for children and families, or cooking sessions as well for families. They do have a framework of standards that we have to adhere to. So we work with lots of local providers in Medway, and we target all wards. So we identify a number of children within those wards and then target the services to be delivered within those wards. In terms of the other holiday periods, the council are currently offering a voucher scheme, so yes, all holidays are covered at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Vicky.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question around the high needs funding budget and the recovery plan for that. Arguably, pupils in receipt of high needs funding are some of the most affected by the pandemic and its aftermath, including lack of medical support and treatment throughout that, reduced therapy provision, and also reduction in social care provision as well. I wanted to know if that will be taken into account in terms of that recovery plan to ensure that those gaps can be filled. I think currently schools are fulfilling a lot of those requirements of other services currently, and I also wanted to know if that plan will work alongside some of those other services to ensure that their offer is increased to support those most vulnerable pupils and children.
Thank you. I'm conscious that the SEND and the High Needs Deficit Recovery Plan are quite a complex and large item that we have come into a future agenda, but absolutely everything that you've said is true and relevant, and we recognise that, and we are working with our wider stakeholders, including health, in the development of this plan. Can I ask that we go into more detail at the later meeting, please?
And finally, Tristan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just in relation to pages 60 and 61, so pages 25 and 26 on the appendix, it's related to the exclusion and suspensions statistics. Just so a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, the data set appears incomplete. There seems to be a lot of gaps from a number of different schools, which is a bit odd, really, given they're supposed to report, presumably, this information to us. First of all, why are there gaps in the data set from a number of different schools? The second one is some of the schools have they've got X's next to them. Does that mean they've refused to give us the information, or does that mean that the information isn't available? And some schools have reported PEX, which I'm assuming means percentage exclusions by school, whilst other schools have given no report on that. And can I just lastly ask, what do we mean by sus by school? Is that a proportion of the pupils that are suspended? So are we saying that 1% of all students at the Howard School are currently excluded and suspended? Or is it a 1% of school days equivalent that are being missed because of, say, maybe a few students that have been excluded or suspended? Can you just clarify what that data set, the suspended by school, actually means? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So suspended by school is per 100 pupils. The X's are because there is such a low proportion that they are not statistically relevant, or we can't share that. And where there are blanks, they are because we don't have any exclusions or suspensions in those schools.
Okay, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. I think members would like to say how disappointed we are that the Commissioner couldn't attend this evening, and I'm sure you will pass that on to her, and look forward to having her answer some of our questions that we've put forward as well. But may I say thank you to you. You've come along and answered our questions extremely well, so thank you. And I move that we note the annual school report, performance report, as set out in Appendix 1.
Is that seconded? Councillor Tranter? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 6 on missing children, pages 69 through 102. Donna and Kelly will be introducing the report. Do you have anything to add before you We are putting it for the debate.
I will briefly, Chair, if that's okay. Whilst the report indicates that there's been an increase in the number of children that have gone missing during this period and the number of missing incidents, it also evidences our improvements that we've made within the service in respect to our missing children. Any missing child, of course, is a concern for any amount of time, and we're continuing to work with our partners to improve our response. And I think this is our first annual missing report. We delivered our last report in December, which was a smaller period of data provided. I think this will give us a benchmark for our annual reports going forward. Thank you.
Okay. Right, up to members. Reminding you that we do have a limit of 3 questions per person, although you may well come back at the end, but stick it to 3 if you can, please. Councillor Purdy.
I'd just like to ask, some of the children that go missing aren't children from Medway, from here, but equally so, we have children out of area that go missing. Now, how do we monitor, because it doesn't seem to be saying anything about children that are out of area that go missing, and we do know that we do have children out of area. Yeah? Am I making myself clear, or is my brain going all round it?
Councillor Purdy, I think that's a question I thought you might answer. So if we refer to section 3. It talks about, let me find the section. 3.14 talks about our children in care that are placed at a distance, and what we know during this period is that there was an increase of 4 children, so we had 50 children that were placed out of area. And we know when we recognise that our response to their missing incidents needs to improve. Now, what we know is our current time scale for return home interviews is 56%. So what we're drilling down to as a team is the 44% that aren't completed in time scale. Now, what we know with children that are placed at a distance is that there will be that delay, potentially for the social worker going to see the child. We know that children in care that go missing, on average, they're likely to go missing on 6 occasions once they've been missing. So we know that they have repeat missing incidents, which then potentially leads to recording errors. So hopefully in our report going forward, I'll be able to evidence and drill down into that, those that aren't completed in time scale. Does that answer?
It does, Kelly, but it is something that bothers me, and it does bother me that we have children that come into here that go missing, and yeah. So, I look forward to you coming back with some reports to shut me up.
One of the things that we're looking at too is working with other local authorities. Yeah. So where our young people are placed, so how we can have a joint working together process of them helping us to provide those return interviews, and we may be able to do the same.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Joanne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm a governor at Free Schools in Medway, and I'm also, I regularly visit schools that are in my ward and when I'm invited elsewhere. And I know that schools really, and I want to commend schools in Medway, because I do think they create a lovely environment in order to challenge children to succeed. But my question is, what are we doing? Because I'm really concerned about children missing in education. Can we identify children that are at risk of this and put in some support right at the base of that? And then is there any way of sort of patching up when they've gone missing, and you mentioned 6 times on average? If we could kind of, I'm not saying bubble wrap them, but do a kind of restorative process to kind of keep them grounded. And, I think tracking and monitoring are key, but also can we talk about how we're kind of re-engaging these pupils? Because obviously I believe, I'm from a travelling background, that, you miss out in education, you miss out such a lot. So how are we helping to plug those gaps when they're found? Sorry, they were my 3 questions.
I may need Celia's support here with children missing education, because I think that's not necessarily covered within this report. The report covers children that go missing, and of course during the time that a child is missing, they won't be attending school. But what we know is that our period of children missing isn't significant, that significantly would impact. What we know is the majority of our children that go missing is under 12 hours. Celia? Sorry.
No, it's all right. I don't have the figures regarding the children missing education. We have a children missing education officer that looks to track down children and follow that up. But that's not the same children that are in this report today.
Yeah, we can definitely look into that for our next annual report and look at the link to when children go missing and then the impact on their education going forward, and does it lead to a child then missing education within Celia's team. I can cover that.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to a question that I think I might have raised last time, actually. On page 75, table H, it talks about the return interviews. I don't know whether this is a different percentage to before, but I know it's 3%, no record. And it just concerns me that why there's no record, and the fact that that 3% could then have a big impact on the others. It could put the not offered, for example, up to 4%. If that was the case, or the declined at 7%, you know, we've got no idea about what these are, and just wonder why.
Okay, thank you. I think you did ask that in December when I wasn't here. I think what we know is that when this was shared in December, we had a number of incomplete return home interviews, which we've improved, and we haven't got any incomplete. In respect of no record, sometimes that's if a parent doesn't engage with us and it's recorded onto our system as a missing incident, and then there's no record of the return home interview because it hasn't happened, not necessarily because it's been declined. If it's been declined, we've had that response. If there's no record, sometimes it's marked down as a no record. I think I'm working with our performance team to improve our data set for missing, so hopefully that will be clearer going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Because I think it would be helpful to sort of see, that would show an improvement if that was the case. Because I think, you know, if the parent hasn't engaged and you've tried on your carer in, you know, numerous times, then I would class that as declined rather than, you know, no record. I mean, that looks like our problem, you know, rather than the sort of the parent or carer not wanting to engage with us.
Okay, thanks.
Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, it's a continuation of Liz's question there. My concern is on Appendix 1 with the return home interviews. Excuse me. Where children, young people who returned home after being missing will be offered an independent return home interview. However, after trying to make contact and letter more than 3 times and still being unsuccessful, the episode will be closed on mosaic. It really does concern me that I know we're trying to do everything we can and we can't make people respond to us, but I'm so concerned about these people that are children or young persons that have gone missing. Sometimes it's because of the parents or the foster parent, and perhaps the communication there is breaking down, and I'm really, really concerned about this.
Okay, what we know is that is a real small number, and before they're closed down on the system, it's reviewed by a team manager and a group manager. So there is management oversight in respect of the risk, and if a parent isn't engaging and the risk is such, then that would be open and taken forward under the necessary processes. There is scrutiny on those, Councillor Vaughan.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we are all concerned on this committee and in the council itself about our children and young people who go missing, and the questions that have been asked are really relevant because I've got them down as well, but there's a couple of ones that haven't been asked, referenced the return home interviews. You are looking at the staffing issue, because it says in the paperwork here that you're going to be having to look at this to make sure that there are enough staff to conduct these, because if there are going to be increases of young people going missing, then you need to have the right amount of people to actually ask the right questions and to do this. So that's one of my questions. Could I take you to page 96? I was quite concerned about the wording, reference the police here. It says, however, the police are not given the power to use force to take a child into police protection, but reasonable force may be used to prevent a child suffering significant harm, etc., etc. What does that phrase actually mean, reasonable force? Because we see this quite a lot in different items, and you know that wording, it's in brackets or inverted commas, but it doesn't actually say what that actually means. And as regards to our young people going missing elsewhere, I entirely agree what others have said. 4.9 on page 77, Medway's contextual safeguarding meeting will continue to take place monthly. This will be a multi-agency meeting. Could there be an explanation of what sort of actually happens there? Because I know what contextual safeguarding is, because I've spoke about it a lot, but it just says those couple of lines and doesn't actually sort of beef it up exactly what goes on.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Okay, so your first question was in respect of the staffing of the return home interview officers. What we know is we've increased our staffing to 2 return home interview officers now, and we increased that in May last year. With the increase of the missing incidents, we need to ensure we need to watch the pattern, because what we've seen is an increase from last year, but we need to understand why that has increased. And I think we are monitoring to ensure that we've got the right resource there. And then we'll take that forward as necessary. In respect of the police and reasonable force, when you work with 16 and 17-year-olds and they may be reported missing, and the police will find the young person and they'll attend the address, if they are deeming at that time that child isn't at risk, then they will not remove that child. I think going forward we're looking at having a multi-agency report coming here, which would be joint with the police, and I think that we can cover that and you can have a full explanation and conversation with them. But I feel that if they're visiting a child or young person and they feel that they are safe, they won't remove them from that property. Donna, you agree? Okay, and the last one is in respect of our contextual safeguarding meeting. We currently have a missing and exploitation panel, which happens on a fortnightly basis. With the launch of the contextual safeguarding strategy via the MSCP with our partners, we're moving to having our missing exploitation discussions within each service. So that's a better line management oversight of each child that's missing than we currently have. And moving forward to the contextual safeguarding meeting, we'll look at places, spaces and groups. So all those concerns that are raised around those individual child, where we're recognising patterns and themes and trends, then that will go to the contextual safeguarding meeting, where we'll have a multi-agency response to supporting that group of children in that area going forward.
Is there any way that we can have a bit more contextualisation on that, or is that something that is just done within meetings and not for us to sort of see?
Have you seen the contextual safeguarding strategy? Okay, so we can share more information in the report going forward around themes, trends and places and spaces, as I know we've done previously when we've had some sessions. Mm-hmm.
Clive.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for the report, substantial and detailed. So thank you, Kelly. The report identifies processes and systems. It occurs to me there's something missing, which is the reasons why young people go missing, and particularly in the context of the increase in numbers. So there has been an increase in numbers. You do the interviews. I'm wondering what, if any, emerging trends there are. And then that makes me think, well, why do they go missing in the first place? Because if we haven't identified that, then it's going to be very difficult to tackle repeat issue. Well, yes, it's got repeat incidences. So I'd be interested to know, you know, what the work is around that. And the other issue, as always, is the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. You know, I regard them as particularly vulnerable. We talked about them in December. I'm still uncertain about the support that they get in that slot between 18 and 19 when they have to regularise their refugee status. So my understanding is that that's a real danger point for them because they get 6 months to regularise their refugee status. They nationally don't get the support. The Home Office isn't particularly helpful, and that at that stage they're very likely to go missing. And of course, it looks after children. My understanding is that it's our responsibility to 25, as with others. So I'm still, you know, really concerned about that. We had assurances in December from the police officer who came about them being recognised as uniquely vulnerable, but I'm still a bit uncertain about whether we are really supporting them in the way that we should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'll take your first question. In respect to the quality of the return home interviews and what they're telling us in order to support children going forward, that is ongoing work. I think what we know that there are successes from our return home interviews in capturing those themes and those trends and the reasons around the push and pull factors for children. So we're continuing to work on that. And we can have some more detail around themes and trends, as I shared with Councillor Cooper, going forward in our report, so it's more meaningful for you. And in respect of the increase that we've seen, and as I shared with Councillor Cooper, I think we need to monitor that. And we think it's a post-COVID increase, and that's why that the increase has come as this or 21-22. But we need to keep an eye on that and make sure that is. Donna, is there anything you can add in respect to the 18, 19-year-old you ask?
Thanks, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Johnson. Sorry, I nearly called you the wrong name there. I think we would recognise that unaccompanied minors are more vulnerable, and I don't think it necessarily is just in the 18-19 bracket. I think, you know, we'd know some young people come in who will be from particular groups of young people from particular countries that will be higher risk of flight and missing. And so I think probably as part of every piece of work of a care plan around a young person, you'd be expecting that is thought about in the care planning around our safety and our risk assessment around those children as we're going along. Because we'll know that some young people are more vulnerable, the young people that are more gang affiliated, the risks around some of our unaccompanied minors, the reasons why young people have those push factors to be or pulled away from home. We would be looking at that in every young person's care plan, or we should be, if we're doing it right. We'd be carrying out that risk and safety assessment and thinking about how we mitigate some of those risks. So knowing that a young person's status is unclear and that period is coming up, we would see that potentially as more of a risk for them, and that should be considered as part of their safety planning.
Sorry, Councillor Adeoye.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, I'm wondering whether there are other local authorities that we could look at for best practice, particularly in addressing the repeat missing episodes. Do you think?
That's part of our ongoing work with the team. They've made connections with other local authority. There is a South East region network which colleagues speak to on a regular basis, but it is learning from other local authorities and how they manage to reduce those repeat incidents.
Thank you, Chair. On that sharing good practice, it's interesting to note other local authorities also contact me and ask about our practice. I've made this pledge to this group before that I and Donna, as well as other key members of children's services, get a missing report every day. So we know exactly who is missing. That missing report hit my email box at 3 o'clock this afternoon. So I know that we have one of our own looked after children, a 17-year-old, who has been missing less than 24 hours, we have parental responsibility for that child. I know that we have one 13-year-old who is known to early help, who we do not have parental responsibility for, has been missing for less than 24 hours. I know that we have one child in need, 14-year-old, who we do not have parental responsibility for, who is missing less than 24 hours. And I know that we have one 15-year-old on a child protection plan who we do not have parental responsibility for, who has been missing less than 24 hours. I know that we have a 17-year-old who is in the care of another local authority placed in Medway, who is missing for less than 24 hours. Now that is worrying, but it is, believe you me, could be worse, could be much, much worse. So we are on to this, and tomorrow I will expect not to see these young people on that list again, because I am absolutely confident that our staff, our partners are doing everything that they can around this. So please be assured that both Donna and I get that information every working day, and we act on it along with staff.
Nobody else has indicated, so Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's refreshing to think that we're going to have a... gosh, I've forgot what I was going to say. You've joined up. Yeah, tell me what I'm going to say, Kelly.
Partnership approach to presenting our missing report going forward.
Absolutely. Well done, Kelly. If you want my job, it's yours. Yeah, and also that thank you for your report, and thank you for Liam for your, you know, it's refreshing to know that we are doing something, because I think we all have concerns. Well, it's obvious that everybody could be concerned, because these children are very vulnerable, and if we don't get them now, we've lost them forever, haven't we? And we don't want to do that. So thank you, Kelly, and thanks for helping me out, darling. I move that we note the report and proposed areas that are focused.
Move on to item 8 on pages 197 through 222. The NSCP update. Leanne's going to introduce the report along with Simon Plummer, the business manager. Unfortunately, neither Paula Wilkins nor Emma Banks are able to be with us this evening. And equally, John Drew, the independent scrutineer for the secure estate, was also unable to attend, and so will be invited when we consider the annual report at the end of this year. So if you've got any, do you wish to highlight anything or add before we open up to...
Yep, thank you, Chairman. I was just going to start by offering the apologies of our current chair, who's Paula Wilkins, as you said, from the Kent and Medway CCG. In terms of the report, this is one of 2 reports a year that comes to this committee from the Medway Safeguarding Children Partnership, and the key purpose of this report is to provide an update to the committee and also to present the MSCP strategic plan and also the business plan. The MSCP annual report will be presented later in the year to the committee and will include a specific update from the MSCP independent scrutineer. As has been mentioned earlier today, it will also include a section specifically around young people in the secure estate from the independent scrutineer for the secure estate, who is John Drew, and that will include around Cookham-Wood.
Members, of course.
That's good to hear. Because, you know, as you know, Councillor Hackcroft, Scott and I have visited Cookham-Wood, and, you know, we'd like to hear that. Can I just ask a couple of questions, please? An observation, really. Leanne probably won't like me saying this again. But we do have a lot of champions identified here, and I'm going to put it forward again because it was minuted at the Health Committee about having an autism champion. Sorry to keep on about this, but I think, you know, it's something that I feel quite strongly about. On 4.2, 201, it's talking about the MSCP new priority about violence against women and girls. Now, I don't know if you know, but the Labour ladies have been doing a survey about this, talking to people in Rochester, Chatham and Gillingham, and we had some very interesting answers, which we have now put forward through our councillor Zoe Van Dyke to Councillor Galvin, for him to read and for us to comment on. So we had a lot of interesting answers, and there were some young people involved in that, one who was sofa surfing, which was quite incredible. And we also had, when the PCC came to talk to us, this was brought up with him as well. And I know that they are you know, doing a lot about this, so I think that's quite interesting. So that's all I wanted to say on that. Could I ask, as a curiosity, please, I'm just wondering, you know, when the actual chair does come to talk to us, because we know about John Drew when he does come, but you know, the other people, are we able to literally go through this with a fine-tooth comb? Because, you know, it's a very, very strong thing that we need to be, you know, discussing and talking about, because safeguarding of children is, you know, paramount for us in Medway.
Yep, thank you. If you'd, if I can just respond to that. So on your first point, I'll certainly note the comment that you made about the champions, and I'll take that back. On your second point, I would be very interested to hear about the survey that you were talking about. As it says in the report, this is a new priority that we're going to be introducing in September, and actually at the moment we're just working out the kind of detail in terms of the work that needs to happen under that priority. So actually if there's evidence that can feed into that, that would be very useful. In terms of your third point about being able to go through the report in more detail, certainly we've committed to bringing the more detailed MSCP annual report, which will cover the period 2021 to 22, to the committee later in the year, and we will ensure that the 3 statutory partners of the Safeguarding Partnership, as well as the independent scrutineer, are available so that you can go through the report in more detail.
Thank you, Simon. Tristan.
Thank you very much. It's a bit disappointing, actually, that the individuals in here, mainly because there's been some big legal changes in this space over the last 4 years. A number of key reports, Wood Report and other documents have come out, which has actually shown that the prior arrangements in safeguarding were not really that good. And if we look at neighbouring authorities, they publish papers to their councillors suggesting how they're making structural changes to their architecture, they're appointing new people into positions, there's been new agencies added on. I do see some reference to it in here, but actually there isn't as much detail as I was looking, given the scale of change which has happened in the last couple of years. And I would have liked just to have seen some acknowledgement of some of the reforms and changes that have happened. And what we are doing in light of those. I know Kent County Council next doors in March 2022 has published a big architecture to their members on how this area has changed. So, and I was hoping to ask that tonight, just in terms of how that changes have been embedded. Have there been any problems with that? Are all agencies working together effectively? Have we learnt our lessons? Because the Wood Report was clear that actually there were a lot of poor practice happening prior. So I just want to make sure that when we do get this person in next that does come see to us, it just acknowledges some of the major legislative changes that have happened in this space. And maybe some org charts around the new organisational structure, maybe some details on the architecture, who the key people are for each of the agencies that are partners in this body. I know some of this is in here, but I'm finding, this strategic plan itself, I'm finding it to be, there's a lot of colour in there and there's a RAG rating, which is great because it shows you where things are going forward, but the context is just missing. And I would have thought that maybe we could just add some more details of some of the big things that we need to be doing and the impacts of that report. I'm just, Mr. Chairman, with your consent, if you could just pass that on. I don't know how. That's not a recommendation, but it's just perhaps the officers could acknowledge that.
Thank you. I certainly acknowledge that. And I mean, just to say, and next year when this update report is presented, can certainly provide a bit more detail. The primary, so we present 2 update reports a year to this committee. So one of them, which is this one, has a focus around the strategic plan, which is kind of forward looking in terms of actually what we're going to do, and the business plan. The next report that will come will be the annual report, which will have a lot more of the detail in that. I mean, just to provide you with some assurances around the safeguarding arrangements and the changes that have been made, the large-scale arrangements to the governance and structure around the safeguarding arrangements were made 2 years ago now, and actually there was some quite significant changes at that time. Part of the that process was appointing the independent scrutineers that have been mentioned today as well. We had our most recent executive meeting earlier this week, and actually there are in the last couple of weeks there have been more significant national reports that have been published that actually as an executive will be looking at over the next few months. The national reports have made recommendations to government about future changes to safeguarding partnerships, and I think as an executive, one of the things that we're looking at is actually what changes might we be able to make now, preempting any changes from government.
Thank you, Councillor. This is ongoing, obviously, and your point about the architecture was a good one. There has been an accountable officer summit, so that brings together, that came directly from the Wood report, which you referred to. So that happened on the 13th of May. So that brings together Neil as the Chief Exec of Medway Council, brought together the Chief Exec Designate of the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, and the Chief Constable. So, and they will be meeting twice a year, coming together in a summit form so that they can be assured that safeguarding practices are as they should be amongst the statutory partners. So things like that are developing, but Simon's quite right. At the next report, you will get more detail of that.
Thank you, Leanne. Clive.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Simon, for the report. Cookham-Wood's been mentioned on a number of occasions tonight, so I won't labour the point, but it is disappointing, to use that ferocious word, that John wasn't able to make tonight. I mean, I absolutely accept that it was a personal circumstances thing, doing something else. But it does mean that we won't be able to have a discussion about Cookham-Wood for a best part of a year after the inspection that raised so much concern. And I raised it with officers, I think, in this forum about having a specific report on Cookham-Wood and the outcome of that report, which I think, my words, not necessarily theirs, officers were reluctant to countenance, and we came to the compromise that we would have the MSCP report and John would attend. So we're now not going to get that for some time. And in the meantime, the situation at Cookham-Wood seems to be still quite poor. The inspectors went in April. Prior to that, there was some sort of violent incident. So clearly, things not improving. As I said when we first discussed this, if this was a school, there'd be a clear programme for intervention and improvement. And because it's a prison service, I don't see what that mechanism is. And in the meantime, these young people are at risk. So, yeah, I make that point. I'd be interested in any comments that we could have. I appreciate what's been said about when that will come. There is a proposed report on the secure school in the work programme already. And I've said in agenda planning meetings, we're getting to the stage where that will become redundant because it will be open. So we put that on the agenda some time ago. We really need to have the opportunity to discuss that in some form. A couple of less strident points, probably. There's a concern in the report that learning is not being passed on as effectively as it needs to be. So I wonder what's going to change in order for that to happen. And there is also a welcome focus on neglect, which was identified in the monitoring report a couple of reports back. And again, I can see, from outside the system, I can see neglect's quite a tricky one for safeguarding because it's, relatively low level. So I can imagine it's very difficult. And I just wonder how that will manifest itself. That focus on neglect will manifest itself. Thank you.
Shall I pick up the neglect question? I think I'm probably best placed for that. And I think probably Simon will capture the issue about the training, the learning. Neglect, it is a real challenge. It's one of our major pillars of focus for the improvement plan. We've continued that this year. It was there last year. It's a big issue to crack. It's not just a challenge for us in Medway, it's a challenge everywhere. We have got quite a plan of action around that, including we've had funding from the DFE to support a multidisciplinary team in Medway that we're just in the process of been setting up. It'll be live later this month. And that team is going to focus and bring in some research capacity to give us a better understanding about how we tackle and respond to neglect. Alongside that, it'll include a range of training for ourselves and some support across the partnership to look at that as well within that offer. So there is quite a plan of activity that will help us to understand how do we best intervene in family life, how do we best understand research that, and understand the difference we make in terms of impact and outcomes, which I think is what we need to do to better influence what we do. And as part of that, there's another range of work we've had about graded care profile, which is an assessment tool we use with families. We haven't been using that as well as we could, and we don't understand really what difference that's making, and we've got some work to do about that as well. So it's certainly something we could update you on at some point, and I'm sure that without a doubt it will feature in the MSCP updated annual report as well, because it's one of the factors that the partnership's obviously looking at.
Yeah, and if I may, just kind of building on what Donna was saying, yeah, certainly it will be a feature of the more detailed annual report. So neglect is one of the 5 MSCP strategic priorities, but actually as an executive we agreed that we wanted there to be a particular focus around neglect during this year. So actually as part of our kind of planned work programme we have got a lot of work as Donna was saying. So to kind of kick that off, in March we held a conference for practitioners specifically around neglect, and that was a multi-agency conference where we were looking at targeting schools, health organisations, voluntary and community sector organisations, and early years settings as well, to really kind of kick that off. We've identified in terms of the graded care profile that Donna just mentioned, we want to get more professionals working across Medway trained to use the graded care profile. So actually we've just agreed from partner agencies to get some additional trainers trained up. So it's the graded care profile is a licensed tool. So in order to use it, you have to be trained. And in order to be a trained trainer, you need to attend the NSPCC training. So at the moment, in fact, next month, we are getting some additional trainers trained so that we can, in turn, train more people to use it. And then just going back to your other point in terms of the learning, actually the independent scrutineer, Rory Patterson, has recently done a piece of work looking at the learning reviews that we undertake as a partnership, and how effectively the learning from those reviews is disseminated amongst agencies. And actually, he focused particularly on 2 reviews, and his findings were that the learning from reviews was being disseminated amongst agencies, and agencies were taking responsibility for that. That one of the issues was around as a partnership, us being able to quantify the impact of that learning and the recommendations that we're putting into place. So that's something that we are focusing on right now. We've done a lot of work over the last 6 months, a year, in terms of how we actually share the learning from reviews that we do. So once we publish a learning review, we produce a report on that, but we also produce a 1 or 2 page briefing sheet for professionals that is then circulated amongst agencies. We also arrange briefing sessions that frontline practitioners and managers can attend, and again they're sort of multi-agency briefing sessions. So we do try and kind of have a range of learning opportunities to share that learning.
Simon, this is just an observation, but often that people neglect their children or whatever is because they've been neglected children themselves, so they don't understand and they don't know that they're neglecting their children. Are we in there supporting these? Well, obviously we will be in there supporting these families with them, because I think that again might be the key to it, as I'm such a know-it-all tonight. But you do see it, don't you, with the children, you know, you look and you think, how on earth, yeah.
I can absolutely assure you we are, certainly from a social care perspective, but also from the partners. There's an extensive range of support and services, whether it's through public health with all of the early support there is for families around, you know, whether it's healthy eating, all those different factors about education and support, whether it's through our Family Solutions, our early help offer, which is about trying to target families early. Obviously neglect is an intergenerational issue. We would try to work with parents, you know, when they're early in pregnancy, where they need it, and support that. And there's an extensive range of support for children in need that are open to social care that have got more extensive needs as well.
Just saying, Donna, you sometimes see these parents and your heart aches for them as much as it does for the child that they've neglected. And you know, I just find it all very sad sometimes. But there you are, we do what we can.
I'd absolutely agree with you.
Before I ask, nobody else wishes to speak. Oh, there is. Becky. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask about the review of supporting adolescents with complex healthcare needs. And it was recognised that one of the factors occurring in that was that multiple referrals have been made by people in regards to those children and adolescents. And I wondered how that's being addressed. Is there some look at if a child has multiple referrals, how that process works, and is there a review of those previous referrals in line with when you take on new referrals? How that process works, really.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, apologies. I was getting a red light there. Are you talking about health referrals to health agencies in terms of the complex health? Donna might be able to add to what I'm just going to say, but on that particular point, we also recently held a half-day conference specifically around adolescents with complex health needs. One of the things that we focused on, and that's just what I was saying about the health pathways, was around the correct health pathways to support children, particularly picking up things like diabetes and sickle cell. So that was one focus of it. The other focus, and in fact it was Kelly Cogger, who spoke at the conference for social care, was around then the referrals to social care for those children, and actually kind of matching those up. Don't know whether, Donna, you want to say anything else?
I don't think I can add a lot more other than to say that what we would do is wherever there's a multiple referral for a child, we'd expect those to be being reviewed for any child. It doesn't matter whether an adolescent or a young child. We would be expecting managers to be keeping an eye on that as those new referrals come into the department, that there would be that check and balance in the system, because you'd always be worrying about multiple referrals for any child. So that's not necessarily only the health angle, but a manager would review that when that comes in, look back at the old referrals as well, look whether there's a new issue, and take all of the history into account in as a whole, really, so that we can make the best decisions. It's quite a complex thing. There's a lot of information to take account, and sometimes families will present with new and different issues each time. So it's difficult to say how you might approach it.
Okay, anybody else? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, again, I don't know whether it's something we've done or said, but somebody else that didn't want to attend our meeting tonight that we're disappointed for. But we're delighted, Simon, that you have stood in and done well, along with Donna and Leanne, so thank you. I don't suppose we'll report that we were disappointed that he hadn't turned up, but I dare say you can do that privately for us, Simon. Thank you. I just move that the committee note the report.
We now move on to item 7, to the council plan monitoring for 21-22, which is on pages 103 through 196. Leanne and her colleagues will introduce the report, unless you wish to add anything to the report before I open it to the public.
Thank you, Chair. This is the report for Q4. Chair, I think I'd like to deal with this in terms of each Assistant Director dealing with the particular REDs under their remit. It's right and proper that we evidence that at this meeting and then open it up to a more wider discussion, if that's okay with you. So, Julia, would you talk to the public health measures 14, 15 and 17, please?
Thank you, Leanne. So the first one is the National Child Measurement Programme. Obviously, further into the document, there are notes, but to recap, that this is annually measured data, and this accurately reflects last year's data, so which is December 2021. So we've just finished measuring the data for this year, which we published in November 22. Our performance is relative to other areas, and we were one of 19 local authorities that were only able to capture this data, so there'll be a lot of disparities across the patch. We're aware that it's increasing, and of course COVID will not have helped the issue, and I think it's going to be something that we're going to see to continue. Trends, I think, are going to continue. So before I go on to talk about the services that we offer to try and support the reduction of these figures, I'd like to sort of mention that we're also seeing this in the adult population as well. In terms of breastfeeding, again, we're relatively confident that this data is accurate, and this is recorded by midwives. We did see a drop, but we're facing the challenges around social distancing, so supporting women, midwives helping them support them through teaching them how to breastfeed, etc. So they had lots of challenges, particularly during the pandemic. Obviously, shortage of staff having to be redeployed, recruitment, etc. So it's been quite a tough year for the midwives and clinicians. So they weren't necessarily on hand to offer the support in those early stages. So what we've been trying to do to support this is obviously to normalise breastfeeding and highlight the benefits to both the baby and the mum. We work with lots of different stakeholders and partners, so we provide training and education to student midwives, so we go down to Canterbury and educate their staff around the importance of breastfeeding. We work with health visitors, we work with our social care staff, children's centre staff around the importance of breastfeeding, but obviously with the closure and limited access to different venues, this has been quite a challenging year. But what we are doing is we've got a big breastfeeding festival in August where we'll be supporting breastfeeding cafes, workplaces, etc. So trying to raise the issue, raise awareness, ensure that everybody is aware of the responsibility. So in terms of the services we deliver multifaceted programs that look to support the cause of the causes. So we have an appreciation, that things have changed recently. So in terms of the cost of living, the life challenges that people are facing as a result of the fallout of the pandemic. So we're not just about treating people, but we're aware that they have other complex issues to address. So we take a life course approach. So we work with families from pregnancy through to adulthood to end of life, which is through a whole systems approach. So this means working with a wide range of partners. So in terms of the public health services that we deliver, we start with breastfeeding, pregnancy services, through to fussy eating for children, little food explorers, exercise and food education clubs for children in primary and secondary school. We obviously have implemented the recently government-funded holiday activities and food programme where we make sure that they adhere to school food standards and that exercise and physical activity are incorporated. And then we have Tier 2 and Tier 3 adult weight management programmes. So they look at a wide range of things, which include supermarket walks, healthy eating education sessions, education around food labelling, cooking, exercise, the benefits of a healthy weight, whilst also understanding that, the mental health issues that people have. One of the key aspects to these areas is to signpost to other services. So we've got specialist clubs for men, so Man v Fat Football Club. We work with lots of charities, church groups, and train their staff up, ethnic groups, to educate their communities. We work with our planning colleagues in the council to reduce the fast food outlets to make sure that we don't have fast food outlets within 400 metres of a school. So what we don't want is children popping out to the chippy at lunchtime. So we're trying to avoid things like that. Again, like I said, we work with local charities, church groups, particularly with the HAF project. So we're really getting out to those communities and accessing those really vulnerable children that most need the services. We work with our colleagues in adult education as well to help deliver cookery programs. And we recognise that certain areas need more support than others. So we have that granular level of information down to lower super output areas. So it enables us then to take our services to those most vulnerable groups and the people that most at need. So a few other projects that we're looking at are around food. So we're looking at reducing food waste. So we recently took Councillor Brake and the Mayor down to Ashford to Fairshare, which run a project that helps reduce food waste and reduce food miles. So we know that we've got 51 charities here in Medway that pop down to Ashford every week to go and collect some food and then disseminate out to the local community. So we would like to work with an organisation that would receive all of the food that's got maybe a short shelf life or excess food that supermarkets have purchased, and disseminate them from a site locally. So that's a project that we're working on. We're also working towards Sustainable Food City Status Award, and we are working with our colleagues in social care safeguarding, because obviously weight is a neglect issue as well, so particularly severely obese children. So I have got an ask from James Williams. I don't know, has anybody heard of the Medway Can Challenge? Fantastic. So we've got a challenge at the moment to get everybody to sign up to walk around the world. So it's 24,901 miles to walk around the world. So we want everybody in Medway to sign up to get us to walk around the world. So far, it's only launched a couple of weeks ago. So far, we've got to France, we've got to Germany, we've got to Greece, and now we're at Egypt. So James's ask is if you could all Google Medway Can, sign up and record and measure your steps. It'll help everybody in Medway get motivated to get out and do a little bit more exercise. The challenge will focus on other areas at later periods throughout the year, but we'd really like to see more people sign up and register, and you know, get the community signed up to register. And just to reiterate, you know, the same, we're waiting a lot of government white papers. There's one we're waiting for in particular in terms of the National Food Strategy. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got 3 targets for children's social care that are currently in red performance. The first of those is around ILAC 3, which is assessments where children are visited within 1 working day, where there's a Section 47 inquiry. You'll see there we've had a slight improvement in our performance on our last quarter, but still below where we want it to be. Same issues really as what you probably saw when we came to the last overview and scrutiny. Issues around some capacity, some staff sickness, and challenges recruiting staff, so where we've got some vacancies, leads to some pressures in the system. But a lot of the issues, I think, more about challenges contacting families, or about making purposeful decisions to delay seeing children. And that may sound strange, but sometimes it's more important to see the child in the right place with the right police officer or the right person, and sometimes it might be better to do that the next day or in the morning rather than doing it there and then. So I do want to assure you, though, we do regularly dip sample and review that work, our managers do, for all of those children which have those delayed visits, to make sure we're confident that we're doing the right things. Sometimes that will be about families' lack of engagement, and it will mean that we've got to chase up and locate those families, or keep pushing to get in as well sometimes. ILAC 4 is our next one, and that's the same issue really about visiting, but those visits are a requirement around 5 working days that we measure. And really the issues are the same for that group of children really. These are quite small numbers of children in the whole, but the same issues, some sort of issues around staffing that have presented some challenges about families not always being locatable or not really wanting to engage in those visits. And my final one to consider from a children's social care perspective, where we've got below target performances, ILAC 7. I know that Councillor Johnson will probably look at me now. We have the same dialogue about ILAC 7, but broadly that target is set as a very stretching target, as we'd expect performance to look when we know we've got it right. And that's a way up line really for us. So it's where we want to be, but not where we can aspire to be at this moment in time, because we know we've got a lot to do. You know, we are starting to see some reductions in our inadequate work. That won't show on this quarter, but I think that's probably where we're much more focused on trying to monitor, can we evidence and can we start to see we're seeing less inadequate work within the system, because that helps us to understand that things are improving. Getting to 80% good will be when we've got there.
Thank you. And the one red one for education is the persistent absence data, which we have talked about at length this evening already. The data that's in there is the most current data, but noting that Q4, the 13.4% is terms 1 to 6 of the last academic year, and Q3 data is terms 1 to 4. So it's not that it's necessarily significantly reduced, but the data for the last 2 terms of the academic year has made that difference in outcomes. And it also has in that bit the data related to secondary and primary, and you'll see that there's a big disparity there, and the data for secondary is a lot higher. There is a task and finish group working on attendance, and the schools contributing to that include some of our schools where that's persistent absence, or they have the highest percentage of persistent absence, and you will get that in a more detailed report in your July meeting.
Members. Elizabeth. Of course. Yeah, Stuart, sorry.
I wasn't sure who you were calling first, sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
Stuart.
Oh, thank you very much.
Age before beauty.
Ladies first.
Thank you. Thank you very much, of course, for the report. There's so much in here, and we look at this quite regularly, of course. A couple of things that I just, more high-level questions, really. One is it was touched on the issues of staffing, which, of course, affects some achievement, which we understand. In fact, Leanne very kindly visited a setting this afternoon of something that I manage for early learning, and we're facing staffing issues too. It's right across the piece in lots of different areas, and we're all struggling with it. I wondered if you could just give an update on to what extent that is affecting some of these objectives at the moment, how much of it is staffing and how much of it is other issues. That's question one. And another question, I sometimes sort of try to get my head around whether something should be on the risk register or as a performance monitoring, or both, and how it goes from one to the other. It is my understanding that if it's business as usual and it's just something we're managing on a month-by-month or year-by-year basis, that's a performance monitoring. A risk is something which just comes and then it's dealt with and disappears. Just could you clarify within the context of this committee's sort of remit, is it exactly how things appear and disappear on the risk register and so on? Because it's sometimes a little bit confusing, for me anyway, to look down the list and know exactly how to be looking at those different things. Thank you.
I'll respond to the first one, and I'll let Leanne respond to the second one, if that's okay. So, staffing, I think, yes, probably every organisation at the moment, staffing's a challenge. We have more pressures and capacity issues in some parts of the system. So some of our children's social work teams at the moment have got more of a pressure and some more gaps. And some of our 0 to 25 disability service as well. We obviously always would try to recruit with locum backfilling while we're waiting to recruit to permanent posts. But interestingly, the local market is really challenging as well at the moment. Nationally, it is a real strain. There's a lot of competition, a lot of people moving, there's a lot of movement in the local market. So some of what you'll see is about staffing. So sometimes things may happen a day later or 2 days later because of some staffing or sickness pressures. And sometimes it'll be, and probably more often, it's about families not available, we can't locate them, we ring, then they're not available when we want to try and visit. You know, they might be out shopping, they might be on holiday, so trying to track them down to be able to get in and see them. And sometimes it might be more about, like I said earlier, we really need to see a child on their own at school or in a specific space or place, and we'll take a more measured decision to say, today is not the right time to do that, we need to do it with the right police officer in the right way. So, and I would say there's probably an even measure of those things.
Just before we go on to the second part of my question, with the staffing, can you give some quantification of where we are with that and how that's getting better or worse in terms of numbers? Okay.
So I think we've seen a slight decline, I would say, in our capacity or our staffing movement. So not significant, but not going in quite the right direction that we want it to be. So in some bits of the service that might be 6 vacant posts, somewhere else it might be less or more. So it's a varied picture really across the whole piece. We've just been doing work and signed up to, Leanne's just signed up to the regional memorandum to try to get a better grip across all local authorities across the southeast so that we better manage the local market. We've been doing work to try to recruit and hold on to the locums we've got. We've got quite a big piece of work and we've been really successful in our recruitment this quarter for newly qualified social workers because we've got quite a big part of our improvement plan is to grow our own and try and retain the staff we have rather than putting all our energy into recruiting. So we've just been successful in recruiting, I think, 12 newly qualified social workers this quarter. So and that's where we want to try and drive to try to bring that stability. But it's a challenge.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I've got colleagues from finance and legal here who will probably be able to give you chapter and verse, but I'll try and make it as simple as possible. So our strategic risk is a strategic risk. So if you know, it would bring the council into disrepute, we couldn't carry out our statutory responsibilities, those sorts of big strategic things. And what we do is we identify some of those risks. And that's why you'll see some of them change, because as we work through resolving some of those risks or completing what's needed to remove that risk, things will change. So that's why you see some of that narrative on the risk register changing. So the one about non-delivery of children's services improvement, when children's services was found inadequate in 2019, there was a whole long list of what needed to be done. That's gradually becoming less and less. And for example, our monitoring visits from Ofsted, we are being assured that that is not as great a strategic risk as it was in 2019. So you'll see some changes around that. There is a process. It's not me just saying that's not a risk anymore, I'm going to take it off. There is a whole process because there's a number of risks for council. The performance information is what we are striving to improve. The impact, the outcomes for either children or wider parts of the community, as Julia has described this evening. So the two go hand in hand, but they're not inextricably linked, if that's what you were getting at.
If I may come back very briefly, Chair. I mean, Councillor Osborne and I worked on audit, and in the financial world, risk is rather, well, more easily understood. In this, I find it, if I might be honest, a little bit confusing. And I've just put that out there for thought, because for most of it, I believe, is performance monitoring. And I say that just because I feel for all of us to be able to understand this, it's better to have absolute clarity. Even though I understand your response, I'm not arguing with it, but I personally find it a little bit confusing in this context. But thank you anyway. I don't want to prolong it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report and the commentary that came first. I just had 3 questions, if I may. Firstly, the ILAC 7, which, Johnny, you spoke about. Obviously, it's a real concern reading that in the report. We're just being absolutely nowhere near our target. And the actions sort of talk about this being a long-term aim. I mean, we are now 3 years on, as Leanne just mentioned, you know, the risks are not as the same as they were in 2019. So I'm just wondering what do you mean by a long-term aim? It doesn't sound particularly ambitious to sort of be achieving 80%. What are we looking at when we're saying long-term, really? And then another question regarding the breastfeeding, and I know that we've spoken about this before and talking about sort of COVID being sort of a big issue there, but I don't think I recall there was any mention of like peer supporters, and they sort of factor quite heavily in this. I know it's all about sort of the first feed, I think, this data, rather than sort of any long-term breastfeeding goals, but I'm just wondering if we have any data that goes back sort of pre-COVID, quite a few years prior to this. It's only because I've got sort of some experience there with sort of being a peer supporter myself at that time, and I'm just wondering if you can see a decline actually before COVID, because this was something that was taken from being an in-house service that was outsourced to MHS, and I think there was quite a change in how that service was provided. Working with volunteers is very difficult, and I think it's something that we were doing very well, I think has changed. And then my third point, also on page 120 and 23, about the percentage of children's social care substantive posts not filled by permanent social workers. So kind of a two-point thing there. Firstly, what classifies as a substantive post? And I just hope that's not a way of sort of somehow improving data. And just, I'd like to see more in-depth data on the number of permanent social workers actually staying with the same family long-term, because although we may have we may be improving about the number of permanent social workers, I still hear a lot from families, especially when I sit on the fostering panel, where they are having a change of social worker on a regular basis. So if we are improving, the number of permanent social workers we have, why is this still an issue?
Julia.
Thank you. In terms of the year breastfeeding, we did see a decline in peer supporters, and particularly more so with COVID, but we're working towards increasing those numbers. We have seen an increase in the number of people to our Beside You website, so I think people have deflected more to sort of access online services. Without having the data to hand, I can get that and feed that back to the group. But yes, it is declining, but now we're working hard to get it back up again post-COVID pandemic.
And just on that, would you see that something that's brought back into... Sorry. That would be brought back in-house, as if you've seen a decline? Is that something that you'd think about doing?
Yep. The cycle for recommissioning is due up in April, and we're having those discussions at the moment in terms of what's happening in terms of the peer supporters. So we're reviewing everything.
Oh, Donna's going to answer. Oh.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll pick up the other couple of questions. I think one was about the substantive posts not filled. So there are full posts, our permanent staff, they are, that's referring to. So that's showing you where we haven't got those posts filled. The second point that you've asked about is about you like to see, as I've understood it, the percentage of children, young people who have the same social worker for a longer period. Now, we measure that for our children in care. We do measure that about how many social workers our children in care have, which is helpful for us to see. I think it'd be really difficult for us to measure this because it's not something that we actually collate that data on. around the broader group of all children. We obviously measure with that children in care cohort.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, and then there was the question on the audits.
That wasn't a deliberate avoidance, I promise. Sorry about that, Councillor. So the audits, so that measure you would expect to see in a service which is good, where practice across the system is good, like solidly good. And although you say 80% doesn't seem very ambitious, to have 80% of good quality practice on your audits across your system would be really good and probably quite difficult to achieve, because if you think an audit, it's not saying everything about that child, the practice around that child's case is not right. It might be one small thing that could tip and drop that below being a good piece of work. It might be something that's outside of a social worker's control. It could be about the child's health outcome or something else that drops that over. Or it could be about the timeliness of something or the completion of something. So it's quite a complex task, that audit. And this is saying that all of those factors come together really well and someone grades that as a really good piece of work or a good or outstanding piece of work. It's quite an achievement.
This is an interesting performance measure. When I first came to Medway, I heard two things. Elected members said to me, on the whole, we had no idea we were an adequate local authority. It was a shock. And when I looked at the performance information, it wasn't actually, in my view, giving you the information you needed to make a judgment about how Children's Services was performing. If and when, and we're determined to get to 80%, I can pretty much guarantee Medway Children's Services will be a good service. So from your point of view as an elected member, once you see it starting to drop below that, then questions need to be asked. And with the other suite of performance information you've got here, I think there's a very good chance that elected members will never be in the position of not knowing how its children's services are performing in the future. So there is a school of thought that maybe, and people have said maybe you need to layer this up, Leanne, maybe you need to lower it down to 40% and then 60% and then 80%. And I've held out against that because all of us around here have expressed ambition for our children. Our social workers, our children's services staff need to be ambitious. We, as the senior leaders, need to be held to account. So it's a slow creep, but when we get to 80%, we will be a good local authority. I can pretty much guarantee that.
If I can just come back briefly, Chair. Yeah, thank you. I think I didn't particularly mean that the 80% wasn't ambitious. I just think I was just concerned that the long-term goal of getting to 80% didn't seem to be sort of the ambition there. And it just, I don't know sort of when we expect to get there. And it just concerns me that we're nowhere near that. And we're 3 years on. And, you know, we're therefore nowhere near being good. That is how I look at that. And that's concerning.
This is a stretched target of where we'd want to be when we know practice is good. We're constantly measuring and monitoring underneath this. So underneath this, month on month and every quarter, we look at all of that audit information. Every audit consists of probably 12, 15 different strands, and we'll look on a line-by-line detail about where we can see bits of practice improving or not, where we start to see things getting better or not. So we are doing that underneath it, and we'll expect to do that over the year, and we'll report into, Leanne has a quality assurance and information board that she chairs as the DCS, and that board takes various, or holds the service to account really for its performance. So our audit and quality assurance information will go there. We'll write a quarterly report about what progress we're making about audit or not, and what we're doing about it. So there's a whole layer of assurance underneath where it's constantly being checked. So I don't think it's that we're not being ambitious and trying to drive it month on month, but it's I think a small step thing that you're measuring in lots of detail underneath these broader performance measures that you see. So you're seeing the headline top detail only really.
I will add to that. When Ofsted comes and does its monitoring visits, they always look at audits. They always look at whether our quality assurance framework is correct. They dip sample our audits, they go over it, and they will give myself and Donna a view about how they find things. You'll be aware that Ofsted came in to look at our care leavers service recently. That letter will be published on the 17th of June. I think you'll find there's some comment around that, but I am satisfied that what we are doing with audit is in line, and we will get there. It is a long, long process when a local authority becomes inadequate. To move beyond inadequate is a very long, detailed and expensive process.
Good point. Pat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm on a different tack, you'll be pleased to know. Thank you, Elizabeth, for those detailed questions. Julia, could you please resend out now the summer programme for the HAF? Because I think it was a bit skeletal for, and unfortunately, as you know, I couldn't make the last lot because I mean COVID, so that would be helpful. And you were talking about distributions of food. Of course, our wonderful Gillingham Street Angels are doing an absolutely magnificent job. And we had a brilliant, afternoon day on Friday in the High Street, and they are excellent. So that's very good. So if you could do those two, that would be very good. My second point I'd like to make is on page 123, where it says actions and reference the inclusion team, and engaging with all pupils who were excluded and those known to the service for being at risk of exclusion. Do you get an inkling, I don't know whether this can be answered, do you ever get an inkling that some of these young people who are excluded and they are at risk are also at risk of running away? Because I know we've talked about this in the previous items, but I was just wondering because, not being in school, etc., a multitude of things in their life could happen, and I'm just wondering if you get an inkling of anything like that happening. It's a bit of a metaphorical question, or hypothetical question, but I thought I would ask. And on page 128, reference actions, the bottom sentences, Councillor Howcroft-Scott and I went to the hub last week, and which was very enjoyable, and we've written our reports of what happened there. And I had a long conversation with the new aspirations officer. I won't sort of reiterate it on here because I know that you will need to read it first. But she's quite an amazing person, and I think she's going to do an awful lot of good work for our young people. So I was very pleased to talk to her, but there were some issues that she brought up to me, and I know that's going to be looked at, but I won't say what it was here. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. In respect of your exclusions question, I don't have the exact number or whether we've picked that up, but I can take that away and look at it. It is worth noting that a lot of exclusions are reversed or not carried through because of the intervention of that exclusion team. When they know that a school is thinking about that, they do go in and offer a lot of support, the strategies and conversations with the schools to prevent those exclusions. So we are reversing a lot, but in direct relation to missing children, I'll have to take that away. Thank you.
Can I just say we'll definitely send the information out as soon as we have it available. We've just gone through the procurement process of commissioning so that we can have them through a framework of providers. So they'll be on our systems and make life a lot easier and quicker moving forward. So we'll certainly circulate it as soon as it's available. And we do work very closely with Neil, and I agree, he does a fantastic job.
Okay. Tristan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So 3 questions, if I may. My first one is on the child protection on page 115. So I appreciate there is probably no right rate in relation to the number of cases, but and when cases are significantly below, that some might suggest that's quite a good thing, but some might also suggest that that could represent something that might not be right or a function that might not be happening. You know, low numbers could indicate maybe there is a low level of abuse out there, but it could also indicate maybe a reporting system isn't functioning, or maybe there isn't something happening that should be. And I noted a couple of years ago there was a significant surge in the number of CPs in other English local authorities, including a significant increase in those with a similar socioeconomic demographic to us. So the question I have to ask is, are we sure that our processes are robust in regards to this, given the cohort average in relation to socioeconomic position? So comparing Brighton, Slough and others in a similar space. That's my first question. My first question is just on the strategic risk register, and Councillor Tranter is correct in audit. One of the things which has become aware, and I know it's been in the press recently, is around the new school that is being moved to Twiddle, and there are significant questions there around finance that have been raised. In addition to that, the bulge capacity issues, the fact that we have a bulge issue, the fact that that school isn't being placed where it is, it's relocating to the east into Twiddle and Raynham, surely that now must be something that should be on a strategic risk register, because that potentially has profound implications on bulge capacity east, on the west of the river, Strood, Peninsula areas around there, because there is a proper capacity issue there. So that potentially that school transport costs are going to massively increase. We haven't got guarantees over planning status. All of these, and effectively we're in a sort of a situation which is pretty fluid. And I was just wondering why that is not on the risk register, because to me that would be something that should be on a risk register by now, and it might be a part of another item, but in my view we should be seeing that, because there's a political issue, but there's also a reputational one and a financial one and an educational one, so it hits all 4 of the criteria, in my view, that it should be on a risk register. And then my last point is just around attendance. On page 124, Edu 3B, you suggest that the value currently, Q4, persistent absence is 13.4%, it's about 1 in 8. And yet on page 29, which is your first report to us, you've said that Medway's data shows persistent absence at 11.4%. So is the Medway's current persistent absence at 11.4% as per the report that you submitted on agenda item 5, or is it 13.4% as submitted on this agenda item on page 124? Can I just get some clarity on what the current persistent absence rate is? Because 11.4% appears to be the target rate rather than our actual rate, and I just want to know if that's accurate. So that's my 3 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll pick up the child protection question you've asked about it being lower than our statistical neighbours. I think we have seen quite an increase in our child protection figures over the last 6 months to 9 months. You'll see that showing in that trajectory moving upwards. I think we've seen an increase in the levels of need and concern for some children post-pandemic, and that is, I think, quite likely to be a post-pandemic issue. I'm confident that we're doing the right things. So we've got a range of factors around checking and balancing all of those children that we're considering that come through. So there's a range of sign-off areas by manager to make sure the decision-making is appropriate, whether that's at the front door or all the way through the system. We have a child in need reviewing officer that helps to look at those children in need about whether children need to step up in the system. We don't always get it right. We know we've got more work to do to be consistent all of the time, but we are certainly moving much more in the right direction than you'd have seen before. And we can be quite confident that those checks and balances across the system help us to keep a really good grip of that. So I think we're moving probably to where we thought we might be, really. So, yeah, I think we are quite confident.
Councillor, just to reassure you as well, the Improvement Board, which has an independent chair, which is helping us on our improvement journey, commissioned a piece of work by Essex to have a look at that very question, and they found that we were doing things as we should be. Donna's right, though, about post-pandemic. Of course, you know, numbers dropped during the pandemic. That whole hidden harm agenda is now working through, and you can see numbers going up. But Donna and I keep a close eye on that, because when I first joined Medway, child protection figures, we were up at somewhere like nearly 500 children on a child protection plan for a unitary the size of Medway. That was too far the other way, if you like. So a lot of work was done to try and rectify that, and I think we did do a good job on that. But now, as Donna's saying, things will even out. Yeah.
Thank you. So on the persistent absence, the data that's in the report in terms of the Q4 is the current data. The report at the start of the meeting was a report on the performance scorecard, and at the time when that performance scorecard was written, that was the attendance statistics, the one that's in the report. So that's actually from 2019, because the 2020 data wasn't published nationally because of COVID, and we've literally updated that 13% that came in and has been through a process, which is why we'd bounce the attendance report, because we want to give you the most up-to-date. So you'll get the most up-to-date, but it is 13% that is the most up-to-date one at the moment. In terms of your question around the free school build and its place on the risk register, so it is a big cost, but that is the DFE's cost. It's a free school. We're not building it. They are. It does have implications on our transport costs, absolutely, and it does have implications in our place planning, and we do have it on our service risk register. But as you may or may not be aware, we have children placed. Things are progressing. If it got to the point where our place planning strategy was at risk and we couldn't provide education, then that's something that would escalate possibly to our risk register. But an individual project like that, which is a DFE project, wouldn't necessarily on its own just trigger that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On that last point, it might be a work in progress, because there might be, it's a fluid situation. And I just say that it's, with the situation which has only just happened in the last month with the move to Twiddle, that might alter a place strategy, because clearly one is not located near the other, and that has implications certainly west of the River Medway. On the attendance figures, so just so that I know, because I think that would have been nice to have had when we had that report at the start today, so even though it's the 8th of June 2022, agenda item 5, the absence data we saw was actually from 2018-19. Is that what you're saying to me? That would have been nice for members to have known that it was from that long. I know we've had COVID, but that is several years ago, and it would have been nice to have had the updated figure in the pack, just because it's worse. So in fact, some ways it would have been effective to audit that. But I appreciate you are going to be updating us with a more accurate report in the future. So thank you very much.
Joanne, you.
Thank you, sir. Julia first, please. Page 1112, the breastfeeding. Your piece of work that you've planned for August. I'm just a bit concerned about August, really. You know, if you're a new mum and you've got other children, they'll be on school holiday. So I'm just worrying about the take-up and why August was picked. So that's my question there. I'm not going to mention a specific point, Donna, but I'm glad Ingrid was on the fostering panel monitoring today. There were some unsavoury pieces that didn't sit very well with me. And, you know, I would want, you know, this is not the forum, but if that could be unpicked of extensions for pieces of work, for complex, you know, babies that can't speak for themselves but are crying at contact, that's abuse to me. But maybe it's just me. It's brilliant to see. I'm so thrilled to see the green for children being in placement, you know, so they know where they're going to be for their Christmas and their birthday. Please send my, you know, praise to your team for that. I know those things don't just happen, but, you know, for a child not to be a parcel and have that certainty, that really thrills me. And I'm really impressed with that. And Councillor Cooper and I were really impressed at the hub last week. We spent nearly a day there. I couldn't get her out. But, you know, just a bit of carpet and the aesthetics, the displays and the enthusiasm from your PAs, you know, who I've probably been a bit critical of the past, but, you know, Helen and the aspirational manager, you know, there's a lot of Tigger things going on there, and it filled me with pride. And Donna, I think you're driving that, and Ingrid, and that's just so good. So thank you. Celia, finally to you. Lovely about the permanent exclusion figures. That's fantastic. Just a little bit wondering if I could have a comment from you, really. Medway schools, in terms of outstanding, when I looked, you know, because I have 5 minutes to look at Ofsted, you know, some of them haven't been in for 10, 13 years. Is that something you're alarmed about? You know, because obviously in Greenwich, 7 of our schools that have been outstanding, only one of them's achieved that sort of 10, 13 years down the line. So is there a comment from you on that, please? And Chair, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we know that nationally, actually, those schools that have been sitting on outstanding over a significant period of time and got their outstanding under a historic framework and not the current education inspection framework are at a greater risk. We do monitor our schools, as I was talking before, those that we can do and go in and do visits with our school improvement team, and we monitor the outcomes where we have them around academies. We haven't flagged any particularly that are outstanding that are causing us concern at the moment, but Ofsted are looking at that. Ofsted will now revisit all of those schools, but Ofsted are also working behind their timeline in terms of their planned inspections because of COVID.
I'll pick up the fostering issue. I wasn't aware of it because obviously it would have only been today, but I will pick that up, obviously, and take that forward with Ingrid. And can I thank you, because it's lovely to hear that feedback about the hub. It's so nice because the staff are working really hard to make that the young people's space, and I think it is coming to life after COVID, and it is really great to see it. I feel like that when I go there as well, and I'm really proud to hear you say that about the service. So thank you.
And shall I pick up on the breastfeeding week? It is actually World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action Week, so it's a global week that we wanted to link into.
Okay. Maybe we could do something when it's not school holidays. That would be great, because obviously it's still red.
Yes.
Okay, nobody else? I'll pass the Vice Chair. Would you make a comment?
Yes, I did want to make a comment. We have here on page 109 the percentage of 16 to 7-year-olds who are not in education or in employment or in training. And we're saying that we've got a lot of vacancies. Now, I understand that many of these youngsters couldn't fill those, but do we still have the apprenticeship scheme? Because at one time we used to have quite a good feedback. I'm not on the corporate parenting group, but we used to get quite a good feedback from that. And we do have it, and we do have success there, do we?
Yeah, we've got a number of care leavers that are apprenticeships, and I think probably you'll get some feedback around that whole sort of care leaver group when that visit comes up that will give you more of a flavour, but certainly that aspirations officer that Councillor Cooper and Councillor Scott speaking about is really actively focused only on employment, education and training for those care leavers and helping them to find opportunities and to really drive engaging them in those things. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because sometimes we used to have awards for them, didn't we? And I know, again, COVID's knocked that all sideways, but we did used to, well, embrace their achievements, yeah. Okay, you're going to be now?
Yeah, we are. We're having time to shine. We're having that award ceremony.
Yes, I know. Okay, where am I now? Item 7 this was, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it's getting late in the evening for me, Chair. Yes, I move the comments that note the report.
Now move on to item 9, the work programme. Teri is going to introduce this report. So over to you, Tel.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have nothing to add to the report. I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of things. There's the LGA training, so the final session of the pilot will be taking place on the 10th of June. I'm assuming that's still correct. And then I just wanted to draw members' attention to section 7 around the briefing note activity. This, as you will see, is a new addition to our work programme report that from the pre-agenda sessions members have asked for. So we will be listing in here kind of what requests you've made, what ones are still outstanding with some commentary where we know about why that is and what ones have been published. So we will keep that up to date. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Welcome back, Teri. You'll be missing my suggestions, I know. Yeah. A couple of things. Stephanie issued the place planning report with a view to us submitting questions. I just wonder how many of us, how successful that process was. I submitted questions, but on the Thursday, so I don't know whether she would have got them before she went on leave. So you may not be able to answer that.
Is this the Thursday before half-term?
No, it was the Thursday she went on the Friday, went on leave on the Friday, I think.
She wasn't in on that Friday, so it's quite possible. I'll take it back.
Yeah. So the question is how many of us responded, and I know I did, even if I didn't do it particularly effectively. There's an item on the work programme for the excess weight, which is a follow-up to the report that we had last year. I'm wondering whether, as a committee, we might suggest that comes to us as a briefing note, but given that we've had quite extensive discussions tonight, people might not necessarily want it in that form. But, my suggestion might be that it comes as a briefing note, so we could, happy for the Chair and Vice Chair to take that away and have a consideration of that. And then a new one. We had a members' item on the youth service, I think probably about a year ago, when it was transitioning to a CIO. I just wonder whether we could do with an update on progress on that. And again, I'd suggest that was a briefing note rather than a report. Okay, thank you. Yeah, it would be my suggestion.
Exclusion of the press and public, and I'm going to recommend to exclude the press and public during consideration of the exempt report on the basis that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Councillor Tranter.
Thank you, Chair. I just, if I may, just for the sake of public transparency, sorry, a bit of feedback there. I'll ask a question. I think it's very, very important that we're clear about exactly why something goes into a private session. And I wonder if that could be explained why that's necessary for this item, please. And whether it's likely at some point in the future, if some of those reasons are likely to time expire, if some point in the future everything may be clear to the public to whom we are all responsible.
Thank you, Chair. As it's noted in the reasons for this, the Cabinet report dealt with a legal dispute, and therefore there are elements of legally professional privileged advice that form part of the background to this, which needs to be considered in private for fairly obvious reasons. And it also contains information about financial and business affairs. So again, that needs to be kept confidential at this stage. I can't promise that the whole picture will be public at any point in the future, but certainly there will be elements of it that we'll be able to discuss more freely than we can at the present time.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I obviously do accept that. We had a brief discussion offline, but I think it's very important the public understand clearly why some things are not appropriate because of that responsibility we have. But thank you.